Oh, so it's really affordable.
It's affordable, and again, it's good for the whole life of your ownership. So it's not like a homeowner's policy or car insurance policy where you're renewing it every 6 months or annually or whatever. It's a one-time fee that's paid for the entire time that you own
One-time
the
charge, if I live in the house for 3 years or 30 years, I'm protected for that entire length with that one charge, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, well, it's certainly something worth doing then and having. Uh, let's see, and then I guess another question that we have, and perhaps, you know, I know you're really good at explaining this and much better than I am. We always get when people are looking to purchase or transfer the property, they're always having questions about how do we vest? And I guess I'd like you, if you would, to kind of cover some of those things with us today.
Okay. So vesting is how you hold title. If you're a single person, you're just a single man, single woman. If you're purchasing the property, husband and wife, you always want to vest as husband and wife, also known as tenants by the entireties. That means that upon the death of either spouse, the property will automatically go to the other spouse. But now, let's say you get divorced, and I've had this happen where people got divorced. You then become what they call tenants in common. You each own 50%. You remarry. You don't have that same protection of tenants by the entireties unless you do a new deed.
Okay.
So, but when you're tenants by the entireties, there's certain things that the property's exempt from. There's a judgment against you.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a judgment against me. If we're married, it doesn't need to be paid.
Okay.
If we're tenants in common, you own 50% and I own 50%, that judgment will need to be paid out of any proceeds, whether you do a refinance or you go to sell the property. So there's protections with tenants by the entireties. Tenants in common, like I said, you own 50%, I own 50%, and our 50% in the event of our death goes through probate. So our will's gonna dictate
Okay.
where yours is going to, where my 50% goes to. It doesn't automatically go to you when it's,
Okay.
if we're joint tenants with rights of survivorship, then it will automatically convey to you upon my death.
Okay, and that's something that you could do regardless of whether you're husband or wife, or brother and sister, or just.
Husband and wife is, tenants by the entireties is the best type of vesting that offers and affords the most protection.
Okay.
So, but when two unmarried people purchase a property together, you're either tenants in common, you own 50%, I own 50%, or we're joint tenants with rights of survivorship. If I wanted to buy something with my son, I wanted my son to get the property without having to go through the process of probate.
Okay.
I would vest us as joint tenants with rights of survivorship.
Okay. And I guess another thing that I think people a lot of times don't understand or don't realize either, so even when they, you know, a man or a woman, say, purchase a home while they're single, later on marry, and then when we go to sell the property, they're always a little bit shocked and surprised that we need both themselves as well as their spouse to sign to sell the property. Can you maybe cover a little bit of that too? That I always find that people find that interesting, and I don't think a lot of people understand how that works.
Yeah, so under Florida statute, if it's an investment property, you as a married person can own it solely in your name, and you don't need your spouse to join in on the deed if you go to sell it. They don't need to join in on the mortgage if you go to mortgage it.
Okay.
However, when it's your primary, when it's your homestead property, in the state of Florida, the spouse automatically has a spousal interest in the property. They've got a life estate interest.
Okay.
You own a property, you know, by yourself, and it's your homestead. Rebecca has a life estate interest. She has the right to live in the property the rest of her life. The kids would actually inherit, minor children would inherit the property if they're adults.
Oh, okay.
So, but because they have a spousal interest, when you go to closing, the spouse that's not on title needs to join in on the deed because they've got to acknowledge that the property's being sold.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that we're looking for when we search title is, you know, you bought the property as a single man, now you're selling it as a married man. We either need the joinder of spouse, or we need to know that it's not your homestead, and we put specific verbiage on the deed stating that it was not your homestead.
Okay.
But that's one of the many things that we look at when we're searching title for 30 years.
Right. Okay. And I think that's kind of an interesting fact. A lot of people don't realize when they're, you know, when we say, okay, well, it's time to sign, and they're always kind of like, well, wait a second, why does my wife have to come sign as well? She wasn't on it when I bought it. I owned it years before us, and you know, they're kind of unaware of that statute here in Florida. And just to clarify a little bit more, though, on the flip side of that, for example, I sneak off one day and I buy myself a little condo on the beach and don't tell Rebecca about it. I can do that since it's not my homestead property. She wouldn't have to necessarily know about it. I could sell it and she wouldn't know about it either, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Don't be planting that seed.
The back condo in the beach. Okay, well that's great. And I guess one last thing I want to kind of cover briefly is you mentioned homestead, and a lot of people again ask about the homestead exemptions and things like that. Is that something you can cover really quickly with us today too?
Sure. So homestead, there's three parts to homestead. Most people are aware that it makes the first $50,000 a tax value, not taxable for city, county, mosquito control, hospital, library, all that stuff. And the first $25,000 of tax value, not taxable for school taxes.
Okay.
So that equates to, dependent upon what the millage rate is, which is the rate you pay per thousand of tax value on your property, it's about an $800 a year savings. The second piece to homestead is that your assessed value for tax purposes cannot increase by more than 3% a year. So you've got a homestead property this year, your tax value was $100,000. Next year, it's 110. Well, because it's your homestead, you're only paying taxes on 103. So now you take that 50-25 exemption and you turn it into a 57-32. And it just mushrooms.
It just compounds more and more.
The longer you're in a property in an improving market. For instance, my next door neighbor does not have homestead on her property. Her taxes are more than double what mine are because I've had mine homesteaded for 12 years.
Okay.
And then the third piece to homestead is that your homestead property is exempt from creditors' claims. So you run me over, I get a judgment for $1 million against you.
I can't run you over. You do all my closing.
So I can't touch your homestead. If you've got an investment property, I can enforce my judgment against your investment property, but I cannot against your homestead. The only people that can take your homestead from you are your lender, if you're not making your mortgage payments, or a government entity. So, you know, you don't pay your taxes for 3 years, the county can sell your house for taxes.
Okay. And that would be like that tax deed sale we hear
Correct.
about sometimes.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's when they're trying to sell the property, basically to recoup those taxes that you hadn't paid.
Yeah. And in order to homestead, you're supposed to be in the property, 6 months and a day out of a year. So somebody could have it as a second home down here. They live up in Pennsylvania, but they're down here 6 months and a day. They've got the ability to homestead here.
Okay.
Because a lot of states don't have homestead.
Okay, so as long as it's 6 months in a day, they can take advantage of those benefits.
Yep.
Kind of keep that tax rate low, if you will, or at least
They certainly keep themselves
cap
insulated.
themselves insulated. Yes. Okay. Well, I know there's a lot more to title, but I think that covers a lot of what people are generally asking. If people have any more questions, obviously shoot us a message, an email. Put something down there on the bottom of the screen. We'll get it answered for you. Or, of course, if you'd like to reach out to Lighthouse Title, the number there is
386-236-0080.
I'm sure Mary or one of the girls there at the office would be happy to help with any questions or anything that you guys might have on that end of it as well. And I want to thank you for coming today and meeting with us, and hopefully this was useful to all of you out there, answered a lot of the questions that you had, and until next time,